Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parasha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet, and joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School of Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanovsky of Anshe Chesed in New York City. We are recording this on Hanukkah tonight. We're going to light 5 candles. Happy Hanukkah to all of our loyal viewers and listeners. We are so happy to share Torah, the light of Torah with you, and to increase the light of Torah as we celebrate this joyful Hanukkah. And but we know that in the synagogue calendar, this is Parasha Mikketz. We have a special haftarah, which we might dip into in a moment or later on in this podcast recording presentation. Mikketz. We are in Egypt with Joseph. Joseph is in jail. Okay, if you're familiar with the play, he's in jail. Poor Joseph. What you gonna do? But he thinks he knows that things are going to change for him. The parsha starts with, it kind of cues us into this because it says, "Vahi miketz shnatayim yamin." It's 2 years, 2 years of days. What a great expression! Shnatayim yamin. When you are in jail, 2 years of days are 2 years of days. It goes by pretty slowly. But when you're in love, like Jacob was for Rachel, right? The days go by like nothing. Okay, I just made that sermon on the spot, by the way.
That was very nice, and I would like to hear more about your incarceration experience. So.
I have not had an incarceration, but I have visited people.
Can I tell you something? I early in the Trump administration, I participated in an act of civil disobedience, and I was it was extremely well done. It was planned out well. You know, there was an arrest, but the police were anticipating, and there was it went great. It went great, and I had about about 8 or 10 hours in the can with about 10 other rabbis, and let me tell you something, that was the longest night of my life.
Well, can we just go in there for a second? Not that there, but I'm saying, many of our viewers and listeners have not had the experience of, being close to a jail. I mean, we've seen, we may have gone on a tour and seen things, but I actually visited a congregant in jail, it's, jail is jail. Jail is not a,
even a white collar. I've also
okay. So if I could wax Sermonic for a moment, in light of what you said, Jeremy, about your longest night, which I thought was the night that the Titanic sank, that's why it's better to talk Torah than to listen to rabbis.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was 2 years of days, and there's Pharaoh. He's having dreams. Okay, and go listen to the play, and you'll get the dreams. But I want to say to people, and I'm doing this for my Parsha sheet this week, is that if you pay attention to the way Pharaoh, where the narrator tells the dream, and the way Pharaoh relates the dream, there are little subtle differences. And not that I want to give examples of it, although there's one example that comes to mind. He says, "I am standing on the Nile, al hayor." That's the narrator says, on the Nile, and then when Pharaoh relates it, he's al sfat hayor. Now this may seem to you to be
translate.
So he says that he is on the Nile. The narrator is on the Nile, but when Pharaoh relates this, he's on the banks of the Nile. Okay, so on the banks of the Nile is different from on the Nile. When you're on the Nile, that's very mythological. That is like you are in the Nile. There's a certain identification of Pharaoh and the Nile, but when he is telling the story, he's saying, "I am on the banks of the Nile, and I see the cows come up from the Nile and move to the shoreline, and they're basically going to graze on the grassland on the shore." That kind of it makes a lot of sense, okay? But when the narrator tells the story at the beginning, it's the Pharaoh's on the Nile. It makes no sense whatsoever. Now, of course, you can interpret on the Nile, on the back of the Nile, but And here I want to ask, the Torah wants to teach us how to read the Torah. And the
So
Torah
I think
always
what's
looking at
important,
the details. That's what I'm saying. The details.
what's important here is to remember that our Pharaoh this week and next week is also the Pharaoh of Shemot. It'll be a different man, but it's the same office. And one of the tensions that run through Sefer Shemot is, who is Pharaoh? We're taught, I think, some of us, to believe that Pharaoh sees himself as a god, and yet he's a man. And so there's this tension that plays itself out. And it's already adumbrated, foreshadowed here, because if he's on the Nile, then he's like a god.
Right.
But it's interesting that the narrator tells us that.
Isn't
Right?
that
Pharaoh
interesting?
himself portrays himself as on the bank because maybe in his heart he knows he's really a human
But
being.
that's what I agree with you. I think that he wants to come off, he humanizes himself. He wants to, because he wants to be taken seriously. Because if I say, I see myself on that, I'm standing on that aisle, it's like, come on. Like, but he wants to be taken seriously. And that's why he already adds a layer of interpretation, in terms of the way he relates the dream. And one more little thing there. It says the cows are Vine Sheva Parot, Vine Minayor Olot, here from the Nile arises Sheva Parot, 7 cows, Yefot Mar'eh Uvriot Basar. Beautiful to look at, beautiful in appearance, Uvriot Basar. Very, very healthy, plump, okay?
Softig.
And when he relates it, later on, verse 18, he says, Vine minayor olot sheva parot briot basar v'yafot toar. Not quite the same. It's that they are very, they're full, briot basar, that's the same expression, but it's yafet toar, that they're good of, beautiful of form. There's a difference between yafet mar'eh, beautiful to look at, and yefet toar, beautiful in shape. And the difference is yefet toar is objective, yefet mar'eh is the appearance, that is to say, someone looking at it. And I'll give you 2 examples. I just did a little deep dive into this, because I'm going to quiz you guys, okay? Who are the other characters that are referred to as Yefet Toar and Yefet Mar'eh?
Wait, anybody in this story?
Anybody
Anybody
in this story? Not in this story.
Joseph.
Anybody in the story? Of course.
Joseph and Rachel.
Joseph and Rachel are both referred to
and
as
Sarah.
good in appearance and good of form, okay? And so
I would think that suggests, and this may not be the only example, that the dreams are about Joseph. The dreams are at least partly about Joseph.
Nice. Okay.
So the cows and the corn represent, in the midst of, as Joseph himself does, coming out of jail to provide some rescue.
So that
in the dark situation, lo and behold, actually there's a guy who is, as the Parsha said last week, Ish Matzliach. He's successful in all that he does. He's just mad. He's got the magic touch, and the cows themselves represent something of that magic touch.
That's stunningly beautiful, because if the cows who come out of the Nile are Joseph, they prefigure Moshe, who also comes out of the Nile.
Nice, very nice.
Well, I would go a different place with that, just, which is that when you dream,
go to some other river, try the Congo.
When you dream, like, I don't know if this is Freud or Jung, but you're every character in your dream.
Yeah. That's right.
That's Jung or that's Freud. One of our listeners, please tell us. We have a couple of psychologists watching this, okay, listening to this. Dream interpretation certainly, is to be able to see something that you can recognize. And so Pharaoh, back to, he doesn't want to be recognized as a god, he wants to humanize himself, and maybe, and I saw somewhere that already cows represent year in Egypt, whatever. Okay. The point is that Joseph, that the way that Pharaoh relates the dream is just slightly different from the way the narrator relates the dream. And from that, we can get the story within the story within the story. And I think, it's interesting, we can teach the Bible on the the level of narrative, right? What a great story. Oh man, this is the best story to tell your children. It's the best story as a storyteller, as we talked about that last week. But underneath a great story, in all the details, are other stories. There's stories within stories. And the story within the story here is the story of who is this man Pharaoh? Who is this man Joseph? And what's the relationship? Now of course, when Pharaoh has the dream and his Khartoumim, his magicians can't answer it. So we say, like we talked about him last year, the Sarha Mashkim, the cupbearer says, Et chata'ai maskir hayom. I want to recall my sins to you today, right? And he says, when we were in jail, there was this Jewish kid in us, and he was able to interpret our dreams. And Pharaoh basically chucks aside the Sarah Mashkim. They haul Joseph up, and they shave him down, and they change his clothing. Okay.
So what I want to say, there's a great contrast here between Joseph and Pharaoh. So Pharaoh, what makes him human? What makes him human is that he can't understand the dreams.
Exactly.
And Joseph then might make a claim to be God because he can solve the dreams, but he attributes it to God. So Pharaoh is the image of Pharaoh, I think, for many Egyptians, is this godlike figure. And Joseph's image is that God gives us the answer or the means to the answer, but we're not God.
Okay, so I want to ask you guys, and we didn't talk about this before, so I want you to help me work this out, because we've said he's amazingly talented. He's got a chush, he's got a sense for how to interpret it. Some people can really do that. Some people have a gift, and he's got a gift, okay? So when he says, and this is chapter 41, verse 15, right? Verse 15 and 16. So Pharaoh says to him, Chalam chalamti, I've dreamed a dream. Ufoter ein oto, there's no one to explain it. Vani shamati alecha, I heard about you. Tishma chalam liftor oto, did you hear dreams and you were able to interpret them? So Joseph says, Biladai, no, Elohim yaneh et shlom paro. God will answer to Pharaoh. Okay, so my question is, come on, yeah, really? Is that what is he saying that, or is he just trying to disguise his own talent? He's been humbled by the jail experience, and he knows he has talent. And is this whole thing basically his knowledge of what he's capable of, or would you say there's authentic piety here? Right? And I'm dubious of the authentic piety, and I'm going to all the way to the extreme of saying he's a very smart kid, very smart kid.
Well, he clearly is a very smart kid, because when he begins to say to Pharaoh how to respond to this dream message that he's received, he says very, very cleverly, Pharaoh, you know what you need to do? You need to find a person, ish navon b'chacham, and you should put him on top of Vayishiteu al Eretz Mitzrayim, and you should take the person who's really wise, who's really discerning, and if you see anybody who's here who fits that bill, you might give him all the power, and so that he very cleverly puts himself in position to get the senior role. But I think that there is a quality of genuine piety here, and that is that in the following way, which is that I don't think that people in the Bible, not just Joseph, I don't think people in the Bible, the Nevi'im in the Bible, the other charismatics and spiritually gifted people in the Bible or in tradition, make a really rigid distinction between the inspiration that they received, the connection with the divine that they received, and their own talents. Like nowadays in the world, people would say, "What? God didn't do this. I did this. I worked hard. I thought. I practiced." I think that the religious sensibility of the Torah is that if a person has a gift and can use it skillfully, that there's no rigid distinction between what God did and what I did. So I think
I would offer
when he says last week, Le'Elohim Pitronim, that dream decipherment belongs to God, and he says it now.
It means he has
God,
mushrooms to help him decipher.
you might have some mushrooms. Then he is saying, Baruch Hashem, I'm plugged in on this one.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I want to
Go ahead.
offer a slightly different interpretation, because what distinguishes Joseph from other prophets is that in many prophets, there's a very strong resentment or resistance to being a prophet. Joseph is all in. He doesn't say,
Oh, send
why
someone
did you
else.
pick me, God?
Yeah.
He said, wow, look at me. But to address Elliot's point, I think that I was asked recently to distinguish eisegesis from exegesis. And exegesis is when we read out from the text, eisegesis is when we read in. And I think your question, Elliot, ultimately leads to eisegesis, because we bring to Joseph our own reading before we look at the text, because we don't know, and we can never know. Is David a pious person? Can a man who commits adultery and arranges murder really be pious? Well, I think a lot of people would say no, but they would also say King David was pious.
So
So
what you're saying calls to mind that great expression, the drash is what you say the Torah means, and pshat is what I say the Torah means.
No, but on your question, Barry, I would say that that's what makes David a human being, and that's he's a fully formed character in the perhaps the greatest character in the entire Tanakh.
he's a little too much like Henry VIII for either of their good.
Okay, fine. So, but here, and I'm trying to read the whole Torah this way, which is to say, the question of, is it all, you asked this question before we started recording, which is, well, why does he have to have this famine, and why does he have to do that? Why is God doing all these things? And I'm saying that within the eyes of the characters themselves, they're not putting to it, they're living in real time in these things, and they're not putting together. It's only at the end of the story, spoiler alert, that Yosef says, it's for the sake of life. But that's like saying, look, the 6-day war was a miracle in 6 days. If you've read Michael Oren's book on the 6-day war, you realize, the great revelation to me about that book was that a war, who knows what the hell's going to happen. It's the combination of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of choices and events and all sorts of things that just fall into some kind of outcome that you couldn't predict from the beginning. And so here, the Bible story could go in any one of infinite ways, but it goes this way. And so from hindsight, they're saying, yeah, it's the divine plan. But in the spot, it's all about human ingenuity, and I would say, and their faith that they have this contact, they have this communication.
So let me offer a different reading then. So what makes Joseph different from the patriarchs is that Joseph, I would agree with you, appears as a human being, whereas the patriarchs are more mythological. So they get the direct word of God, and Joseph is kind of fumbling around in the dark. And that's our experience, right? Most of us don't get a direct experience of God. We're looking for signs. And I think, sometimes it strikes me that the Torah is its own countertext, because we read a lot of certainty into the stories that in real time cannot be there, right? Joseph doesn't know that he's going to be rescued. He doesn't know that he's going to become second in command. He might hope it, but he doesn't know it until it actually happens. And then he can look back and see, oh yes, this was the hand of God all along.
There's this famous story about the paradigm heretic in rabbinic literature, Elisha ben Avuya, who is said to have yatzala tarvut ra'ah. He leaves the rabbinic world for some other kind of life pattern, and
we'll translate. That's not tarvut ra'ah is not other.
Well, that's in rabbinic parlance. He goes from the good culture to the bad culture. He goes out from religious order and piety to Greek or whatever it was that he goes out to. But there's a story. There are two commandments in which the Bible explicitly says, if you honor your parents, you'll have a long life. And if you shoo the mother bird away from the nest before taking the eggs, you'll have a long life. And Elisha ben Avuya is said to have seen one time a father say to a child, "Can you climb up that tree and shoo away the mother bird and take the eggs?" The child is doing both of the mitzvot, for which long life is promised, and he climbs up the tree, and then he falls out of the tree and breaks his neck and dies. And Elisha ben Avuya says, late din v'leit dayan. There's no judge, there's no judgment. Actually, there's no reward for mitzvot, and the Bible's wrong. And there's maybe a good illustration of the problem that you guys are pointing to right now, which is that Joseph cannot know. He is like all faithful religious persons, faithful religious people. He's got to trust, and he's going to keep walking the path, and he's going to try to make it work out okay. But can you imagine, he's back and forth, and after the brothers have come, and he sends them back up to Canaan to bring back Benjamin. They bring Benjamin back down, and he's still manipulating, and he's doing all kinds of, he's yanking their chains in a bunch of different ways. Can you imagine if in this whole story, when Joseph was first thrown into the prison, there was a bunch of violent guys and they beat him to death. Or, he sends the brothers back to Canaan and they're attacked. They're attacked by jaguars and panthers in the desert. And there are any number of things that could have come out in the Elisha ben Avuya story to frustrate this very clever, well-plotted plan. But that's not how it comes out. And I think that Joseph is portrayed, I don't know about the real person thing, but I think that there are a couple of ambivalences that are really very vivid about Joseph. That he is, on the one hand, he's got a good plan, and he's got a plan that is designed to teach the brothers a certain kind of brotherliness and care for each other they didn't have before, and that's part of the plan. And the other thing is that he's tremendously vulnerable, and he's frightened, and he accuses them of being spies because he's afraid of them, because of how they treated him before. And so I like the way that Joseph is portrayed as simultaneously the total master of every event that happens, and he's the puppeteer, and that he's totally vulnerable and totally frightened, and he's subject to all the stuff that other people are going to do. And that to me really describes, like, part of being human.
So there's so many
Nicely put.
to comment on in there, in terms of where the faith is. I would just take small disagreement with you on the patriarchs. They also are dealing with the intermittent and sporadic revelations of God, and if you kind of chart out on a graph when God speaks to Abraham and the length of time that goes by between God speaking to Abraham, it's sometimes years. And so Abraham has to rely on these sporadic events. And I think that's the greatness of Abraham, that he maintains his faith despite the evidence to the contrary. God promises him, and then nothing happens. And God will appear to him, years later, and nothing will happen. And so the strength is his reliance and his trust, which God, which the Torah accords. It honors Abraham. It says V'amin b'Hashem. He trusts in God, and that's his greatest asset. And in some way, that's a defining feature of all the characters, that they're in the world, they have evidence, and they have trust. And sometimes they don't even have evidence. And Joseph here has so much to complain about. I think he has been humbled, and yet he is so in tune with the art of dream interpretation that he's able to skillfully interpret the dream and manipulate the situation masterfully, and then say, it's God. It's God that does it. God gave me the talent to do that, which is like saying Michael Jordan saying, God gave me the talent to throw a ball, which is true, except it also, doesn't account for the thousands and thousands and thousands of hours of practice.
Yeah, but I'll just repeat what I said before. I don't think that as a religious person, I don't see a need to distinguish those two things. It's true. Michael Jordan, has a lot of, as we say, God-given talent, and nobody, if you ever watched a sporting event, lots of people think Jesus was rooting for their team. but I also think that there's nothing in the Bible, or not only in the Bible, in the stories that it tells, but there's also nothing in our experience that says, God does anything without human participants and human partners. And I think that's a pretty good thing about religion.
Right. Let's I want to move to this, the moment where the brothers come down and Joseph in that split second decides to be cruel to them. And then they have this little aside, and that's chapter 42, verse 21, where the brothers say, Ish alachiv, they speak to one another, Aval hashemim anachnu alachinu. We are guilty about our brother. Asher ra'inu tzarat nafsho. We saw in his torment, Bihitchanano eleinu velo shamano, when he pleaded with us and we didn't listen.
What's the citation? Tell again.
It is 42:21. Therefore, that's why we have this word Tsoris. We are going through hell right now because of what we did. And it's not because of what we did, it's because we didn't listen to him. Right? That's I got a chill thinking that.
This is a great line, because first of all, it didn't recount that.
Exactly.
It didn't recount that, when these things were happening. That's not part of the narrative back in the previous parasha. But that just the vividness of, he was begging us and we ignored him. That hard-heartedness is what I said before about Joseph's got a plan, and the plan that he has is all about opening up their hearts to what they've done wrong and making them choose to behave differently. That's the definition of tshuva.
Do I think that there's some settling scores here?
Well, there's that too. But I think he is well positioned, both with Shimon. So what does he do? Our listeners will remember that the brothers come down and he accuses them of being spies, and he wants to know all the details about the family. He interrogates them about the family, and he says, "Okay, tell you what, I want you to go back to Canaan with all your food and give it to your father, but I'm going to hold one of you hostage.
Yeah,
we're going to throw Shimon in the pit, and let's see how you guys handle that this time." And they say, "Okay, see ya," and they leave Shimon in the pit. And then the same thing is going to replicate when Benjamin is accused of theft, wrongly accused of theft. Joseph has framed him, and he says, "Okay, now I'm throwing Benjamin in the pit." And then this time they say, and this is next week's parsha, "Oh, we can't let that happen." So they have learned that when brothers are thrown in pits, you can't let that happen.
Well, so I'm just looking at the clock here. We're almost out of the time here, but so let's fast forward to the end, okay? Because the parsha is going to end on this cliffhanger, and talk to me about chapter 44, right? This is where they take Benjamin. Go to verse 13. Vayikre'u simlotam. They tear their cloaks.
Oh,
yeah,
that's so great, because the last time when they were first jealous, angry, hate each other brothers, they tore Joseph's coat. Now they tear their own coat in grief and guilt.
Yeah. Okay. By Amosi Shalamaro, they load up their, and Vayavo Yuda vechav Beita Yosef, they go back to Joseph's house. Vuhu Odenna Sham, and Joseph is still there. Vayiplu lefanav arza, and they fall on their face. They fall on their face. And
so now we move to the part where Joseph appears like the Wizard of Oz.
Okay, go ahead, take it then.
So he says, "Don't you know I can conjure up what you've done?"
Yeah.
However you want to translate Nachesh and Nachesh.
I can try. And then this classic line, verse 16, chapter 44. What are we going to say? Judah says, what are we going to say to our master? Ma nedaber. What are we going to say? Ma nitzdadak. Right? These are words that are now part of the liturgy.
He's davening Ne'ilah.
He's davening Ne'ilah. He's like, this is the first act of supplication. It's so profound in the sense that,
well, it's the second act, because Joseph in the pit had the first.
Okay, fine. So here,
and his prayer wasn't answered. Here
is Judah trying to reverse a divine decree. There's so much, folklore kind of funneled in here, because when a sovereign makes an edict, it's in all the folktales, it doesn't get reversed, but here he knows what he's up against, Judah.
Right. So this is also was fascinating to me. So when Joseph is thrown in the pit and then sold to the Ishmaelites, Midianites, they punish an innocent person.
Right.
Now, before Joseph, they realize their sin has been discovered, and they want everyone to be punished. The guilty, as who is presumably Benjamin, and all the innocents. And what does Joseph say? No, only the rest of you can go free. I only want the guilty person.
Yeah.
And it's kind of disturbing.
It's amazing. It's an amazing story. Okay.
Are you going to sign off? Because I just want to.
Go ahead.
No, I just want to say one thing before we sign off, so we can continue this portion.
So go ahead.
No, I want to say something before we sign off about the date that I was speaking. That we're recording this on the English calendar, and Abraham.
So here today. So say it.
Today is we're recording this on December 22nd, 2022, and tomorrow on the English calendar, December 23rd, 1972, or 50 years since Abraham Joshua Heschel's death, at only age 65, unbelievable. And the Hebrew anniversary will fall out in January, in the month of Tevet. I forget exactly
19 Tevet, I think it is. Yeah.
Which is it? Yud?
19 Tevet, I think.
19 of Tevet. And so I had a class this semester in the shul about his religious thought, and among the things that we looked at, we watched the video, which probably some of you have seen, this interview done just a week before he died. Very vivid about his religious thought. It was on NBC with the interviewer Carl Stern, and one of the main things that he said is that, and as Heschel, it's funny, this old Polish Jew, Warsaw Jew with a thick Yiddish accent, the Bible. He's always talking about the Bible. And the main thing about the Bible is that God is profoundly concerned with humanity. And he says, he didn't say, Spinoza said, humanity's like way below God's radar screen. God's worried about the laws of physics. That's what God should worry about. Not the widows and orphans in Jerusalem, but that's exactly what God is worried about, the vulnerable. And God, despite the fact that humanity has lots of failings, Heschel said, God keeps giving you a chance because God expects you to rise to the occasion. And that's not totally distinct from the Yosef story, right? God is concerned about this poor guy unjustly imprisoned in Egypt, a paradigm for the people that will be his descendants unjustly imprisoned in Egypt, and wants to give people a chance to make this thing right. And that's one of the great core themes in Heschel. That's what it means by God in search of man. So I just, it's here we are on this date, 50 years exactly to the day, minus one day from his death, and to think about that affirmation of God's trust in humanity and human adequacy to live up to the promise that we actually have.
We could spend hours talking about Heschel, but just let me ask you this question: in your mind, in your opinion, do you think that Heschel is getting a retread now? You think that people are going to rediscover Heschel? I mean, this is quite a momentous milestone, 50 years since his passing, or is he?
I don't know.
I had a teacher when I was at Spertus College of Judaica, Rabbi Byron Sherwin, who was one of Heschel's disciples. And I remember someone made a comment. Heschel had what we might say 4 disciples: Seymour Siegel, Wolf Kalman, Sherwin,
Gesner.
But none
Arthur
of
Green, yeah.
But none of Green hardly knew him. But none
That's
of them.
Not true. That's not true.
I believe that their interchanges were less, because I was just reading in the Nachman biography. I don't know that he actually studied with him, but anyway, it's neither here nor there. The point is that Heschel's disciples didn't have disciples, and then if you count Green, then I would retract my remark. But that's what someone said to me many years ago.
That Heschel's disciples didn't have disciples,
and so it seems like there's a disjunction in Heschel's thought because there was no one to carry it on.
By the way, I know from Art personally that they may have had some rocky spots in their relationship. Art said that that with Heschel, when I wanted him to be my professor, he wanted to be my Rebbe, and when I wanted him to be a Rebbe, he wanted to be my professor. When Art was at the seminary, actually he had basically two classes. He had Gemara and private tutorial with Heschel. Nice rabbinical school. But I think that for me, like just to boil Heschel down with the way I think of it, I actually don't think Heschel is an incredible philosopher. I think that he's pretty scattered. I don't think he really develops.
He's not systematic.
But he is the best interpreter of what it is to be a faithful Jew. The best. He describes what it's like to do mitzvot, what it is like to live in God's light, what is like to search for God, what it's like to find and sometimes not find, the feeling of exaltation, the feeling of loneliness. Heschel is just a superior, and if you open up any of the books tend to have a short chapter made up of 3 or 4 sub-chapters, and that's true also in Torah Mina Shamayim. And what I think that means is that he is just unparalleledly excellent at presenting one thought at a time. And that's not a small thing.
Not a small thing. You know, I mean, and now we have to conclude, but I would say that one of the things I take from Heschel is that you know, the among many, of course, the whole notion of amazement, you know, and that the Torah itself, and here's where we're going to get back to the Parsha, there's amazement that contained within it are the stories and nested in stories, and simply by putting it under the magnifying glass of reading, interpretation, analysis, and of course conversation, you can unfold and unleash and reveal things that you don't know and things that you never knew. And that's the discovery part, I think, was I think essential to the amazement that he certainly experienced and certainly tried to convey. And we've tried to convey too. And we've reached the end of our time.
And you know, Elliot, what do you always say as you introduce?
It's an amazing Parsha.
It's an amazing Parsha.
It's an amazing Parsha this week. Because it is an amazing, it's heartbreakingly amazing. And with that, we're at a cliffhanger because Joseph put Benjamin in jail. What are we going to do? But you'll have to find out next week on the next edition of Parasha Talk. So for now,
Shabbat shalom.
and Shabbat Shalom.